Good afternoon, class. According to the publication Watch LA, there are about 40,000 houseless folks in just the LA County alone. Those are just the numbers that are accounted for. While many of the factors that contribute to homelessness and housing insecurity in this country are arbitrary, they include things such as drug addiction or mental health. The majority of the things that really do affect people's housing securities are corrupt policies and just antiquated policies and things that don't really work with how we do things nowadays. I'd like to talk a little bit about some of the policies that have been scrapped or had their funding cutted, as well as some of the solutions presented. Now that I've introduced my topic a little bit, I'm going to go ahead and get right into what the most gutted public program is in this country is public housing. According to the Housing Public Development, HUD, they experienced a 15% pay cut last year, and that was about $8.6 billion. So their budget went from like $58 billion to about $47 billion in the 2020 fiscal year. This was in part largely due to the Trump administration cutting funding. Some of the other programs that are a little antiquated are Section 8, which is a subsidized public housing. Oftentimes people will find themselves on the wait list for 4 to 11 years, which is ludicrous. A lot of this problem stems from the number of actual facilities to apply. Oftentimes they'll find that there are about 20,000 people applying to public housing through one single site or in one single community, when oftentimes they don't have the resources to house more than about 1,000. Families are also the most affected by this issue because the larger the size of the house, the more difficult it is to get on the wait lists. This obviously affects people with children because nobody should ever have to experience any kind of housing insecurity, especially somebody at a developmental age. I, in my 27 ripe years of life, can definitely deal with like being in between places and crashing on couches. I would have less of a problem waiting for a couple years to secure a spot than somebody with, like the grandparents of the children. Now that I've spoken a little bit about the things that aren't working with the current housing policies in our country, I'd like to talk about some of the things that are and aren't working, such as some of the developmental policies that are actually barring people from building more Section 8 housing. According to the Cato Institute, there's a $9 billion a year federal tax exemption for the development of low-income housing in communities. However, oftentimes through Oftentimes, in the last year, the Trump administration has considered cutting this program as well, just because of its kind of corrupt tendencies. A lot of the money falls to the wayside and doesn't actually end up in the hands of the people that need it to develop these public housings through a system of complex, bureaucratic, whatever you want to call them. A lot of the money ends up being sold back to banks or to other developers for a profit. So none of the housing gets built, and they become more and more exclusive, especially in more like affluent neighborhoods and high-end communities. You'll find that there are significantly less Section 8 housings than there should be. Now that I've spoken a little bit about what the developmental policies are that bar people from getting houses, I would like to talk about some of the things that we can do to fix these issues. And I think one of the biggest ones that I was reading about, according to the New York Times, was just kind of reconfiguring how we develop housing. We are moving away from the type of society that establishes families at a young age. Oftentimes, the median housing price in this country is about $1 million, which makes it incredibly unaffordable for anybody my age to even consider home ownership. So we find that rentals tend to be a safer option. If we made smaller and developed smaller rentals, then they would be more affordable than trying to fit people into like 2, 3, 4 bedroom apartments where you end up living with like 6 people you don't really know. In conclusion, now that I've spoken a little bit about the factors contributing to housing insecurity in this country, I just want to thank you guys for listening, and hope that it has given you something to consider in the way that you approach this in your life.